She looked directly at my daughter, my 8-year-old child, and said it like she was commenting on the weather. I'm giving my jewelry to the girls who deserve it, not her. Then she pointed, not at one of her nieces or some random cousin. She pointed at Arya, my daughter, the one who's been in this family since she was 3 years old, the one who calls my husband Dad because he earned that title in every way that matters. She's barely even blood, she added with a shrug, like it was just a fact, like my daughter's worth could be measured in DNA. Everyone laughed, not the loud kind of laugh, the polite, uncomfortable kind, the kind that tries to pretend a comment like that didn't just rip through the room. I looked around the living room at faces I've smiled at for years, faces that watched my daughter grow up. But no one said a word. Not a single person stood up for her. I felt my stomach twist. I knew Sylvia, my mother-in-law, had always been distant with Arya. She never said granddaughter, just Arya. No birthday cards with her name, no framed photos of her on the wall next to her cousins. But she'd never said it out loud. Not like this. Not in front of everyone, and I froze. Because for a second, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to start a war in the middle of a family birthday party. But before I could open my mouth, Arya stood up. She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just stood, calm and steady, in her little sunflower dress with her curls pulled back and her chin slightly raised. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't scared. She was ready. She walked right up to Sylvia, looked her in the eyes, and held out a folded piece of paper. "Grandma," she said clearly, "Dad told me to give you this note if you ever said that out loud." The room went still. No one knew what to say. Sylvia blinked. Her hand hovered over the paper like it was a bomb. I could feel the silence thickening around us, the shift in the air as every person in that room realized they'd just witnessed a line being crossed. She took the note. She unfolded it slowly. And as her eyes moved across the page, her whole face changed. The smugness disappeared. Her jaw tightened. Her hands trembled just enough for me to see. She looked up. She didn't say a word. And for the first time since I married into this family, Sylvia had nothing to say. I've never felt fully welcome in Sylvia's house. The walls are filled with smiling faces, wedding photos, school portraits, baby pictures, but none of Arya, not even one. For years, I told myself it didn't matter, that what we had inside our home was stronger than what we were missing outside of it. But I always knew, deep down, we were being tolerated, not accepted. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and we were at her house for Caleb's cousin Rachel's birthday. Sylvia had gone all out like she always does. Long table covered in streamers, piles of gifts, a buffet full of food none of us were allowed to touch until she made a speech. Everyone showed up, all smiling and hugging and pretending this family hadn't been taught to choose silence over confrontation. Caleb had to work a late shift at the hospital. He's a trauma nurse, always calm under pressure, always thinking ahead. He hated missing family events, especially because he knew how things could get without him around. Before he left that morning, he kissed me on the forehead, then knelt beside Arya and whispered something in her ear that made her smile. Later, I found out he had quietly slipped that note into her hand. Arya was my daughter from a previous relationship. Her biological father left before she turned 2. He didn't want to be a father, and I stopped trying to make him pretend. For a long time, it was just me and her. Late nights, tight budgets, quiet birthdays. When I met Caleb, I didn't expect him to love Arya the way he did. But from the start, he was all in. He held her like she was made of glass. He called her kiddo and brought her sunflowers every time she had a school recital. She calls him daddy now, not because I asked her to, because she chose to. Sylvia never liked that. I think it bruised something in her. She has 2 other granddaughters from Caleb's older brother, and they're her pride and joy. Matching dresses at Christmas, weekly sleepovers, little gold lockets with their initials. She never tried to hide her preference. I'd see it in the way she only ever complimented them, in how she'd call Arya sweet in that vague, detached way people use when they're trying to stay polite. But she never said anything direct. Not until that day. At the party, Arya was running around with the other kids, her curly hair flying behind her as she raced across the backyard. She laughed with her whole body like she always does. It was one of those rare moments when she looked entirely carefree. I stood on the patio, watching her, sipping from a plastic cup of lemonade, trying to ignore the ache in my chest that never quite went away when we were here. Sylvia came outside carrying a velvet box. I knew it was the jewelry box before she even opened it. She made a show of it, walking around to each woman in the family, letting them peek inside, whispering to them with dramatic flair like they were in on some royal secret. I stayed quiet. I didn't care about her jewelry. I cared about how she made Arya feel small. My mom used to tell me, some people will hurt your child just to get to you. I never understood it until I became a mother myself. When someone loves your child with conditions, it cuts deeper than anything they could ever say about you. And Sylvia? She never missed a chance to remind me where Arya stood in her imaginary hierarchy. Caleb told me once, "My mom loves control. She plays favorites so she doesn't have to be questioned. But when it came to Arya, it wasn't just control. It felt personal." Inside, the kids were gathering around the cake. Arya stood near the edge, a little separate from the others. She looked toward me and gave a tiny wave. I smiled back, but in my chest, something tightened. She knew. Even at 8, she felt the difference. No one had to say it out loud. But then Sylvia did, and she didn't whisper it. She stood in the middle of the living room, jewelry box in hand, and made sure everyone heard. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment silence finally stopped protecting her. Inside the house, the air was thick with that fake kind of warmth people use when they don't want to deal with what's real. The kids were on the floor with plates of cake and soda. The adults hovered near the kitchen island with wine glasses and practiced smiles. The kind of atmosphere where people avoid eye contact just in case someone says something honest. Sylvia walked into the center of the room holding her velvet jewelry box like she was the queen of some royal court. She tapped the lid with her finger to get everyone's attention, and without waiting for the room to quiet down, she started. "Well, I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger. These pieces..." She paused for effect and popped the box open. "They deserve to go to the girls who'll carry on our legacy. Not just anyone, the ones who truly deserve it." A few of the women leaned in closer. Her niece Megan let out a soft "ooh" at the sparkle of an old brooch. Someone clapped politely. It was a performance, and they were all playing their parts. Sylvia turned slowly, scanning the room, making sure she had everyone's attention. Then her eyes landed on Arya. I was standing just a few feet away, close enough to see what was coming before she said it. "Not her," she said clearly, lifting her chin. "She's barely even blood." I heard the words before I fully processed them. They struck like a slap, not loud but sharp enough to leave a mark. There was an awkward shuffle of feet. Someone laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of sound people make when they want to pretend they didn't hear cruelty dressed up as honesty. I looked around the room. No one said anything. Not Caleb's sister, not his aunt, not the cousins or the uncles or the grandparents. Just silence and that awful fake amusement. And Arya was standing right there. She was holding a paper plate with a half-eaten cupcake, her cheeks still a little pink from running around outside. She blinked once, slowly, like she needed a second to understand what had just been said. Then she looked at me. I felt my body tense. My first instinct was to walk over and scoop her up, to get us out of there, to never come back. But I didn't move. Not because I didn't want to. Because Arya did something before I could. Something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. She stepped forward. She didn't cry. She didn't look confused or embarrassed. She looked calm. Steady. Like this wasn't the first time she'd felt small in that room, but it was the first time she wasn't going to let it slide. She walked up to Sylvia and reached into the small side pocket of her dress. Then she pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out. "Grandma," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Dad told me to give you this note if you ever said that out loud." There was no hesitation in her voice. She wasn't shaking. She didn't stutter. She just stood there, holding out the note like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Sylvia blinked, surprised. She looked around the room, suddenly unsure of herself. Then she slowly reached out and took the note. Her hand trembled just a little. Her lips pressed into a tight line. She looked down and began to read. The room fell into an almost sacred silence. You could hear the crinkle of the paper as she unfolded it. I watched her eyes move line by line. I couldn't see her expression completely, but I saw enough. Her mouth twitched, not in amusement or pride, but something harder to place. Her eyes didn't lift. She kept reading, and the deeper she went, the more her face changed. Her hands tightened on the paper. Her posture straightened, then slumped slightly, like the words were knocking the wind out of her. She didn't say a word, not to Arya, not to me, not to anyone in the room. She folded the note back up with slow, deliberate movements and placed it on the coffee table. Then, without looking at a single person, she turned and walked out of the room. No one followed her. For a few seconds, it was completely quiet. The TV in the background kept playing some old sitcom, but no one was watching. Everyone was still staring at the doorway where Sylvia had just disappeared. And Arya? She walked back to me, cupcake still in one hand, and sat beside me on the couch. She leaned her head against my arm like nothing had happened, but something had. Everything had. As the door clicked shut behind Sylvia, the room seemed to breathe again. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer coming from her. It was sitting with the rest of us, heavy and impossible to ignore. Arya leaned against me, and I wrapped my arm around her, still stunned by what she had just done. My daughter, 8 years old, had stood up in front of a room full of adults and handled herself with more grace than most people twice her age. I looked at her and whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Daddy told me she might say something mean. He said the note would help." I kissed the top of her head, trying not to let her see how shaken I was. I was proud, but I was also furious. And underneath that, I was hurting in a way that's hard to describe. I wanted to scream at everyone in that room who had stayed quiet. I wanted to demand answers from people who had let the moment pass like it was nothing. Instead, I held my daughter and let her take the lead. That was her moment, and she chose strength. Later that evening, after the party had fizzled out and people had started to leave without really saying goodbye, we got home and I called Caleb. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said, sounding tired. "How did it go?" I paused. Then I told him everything. Every word Sylvia said, every silence that followed, every pair of eyes that looked away instead of stepping in. And then I told him what Arya had done. There was a pause on his end of the line. I could hear him take a breath. "She really gave her the note?" he asked. "She did, just like you told her." I could hear his voice change. He sounded proud, but also pained. "I was afraid that moment would come," he said, "that my mom would finally say it out loud. I hoped she wouldn't, but I knew if she did, I needed to be clear." That's when I asked, "What did the note say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I wrote it the day Arya called me daddy for the first time. I knew my mom would never accept her, not the way she deserved. So I wrote down everything I wanted to say if she ever crossed the line. I didn't want to yell or argue in the moment. I wanted her to read it and know that if she ever made Arya feel like less than family, she'd lose me too." His voice didn't shake. He wasn't trying to sound heroic. He was just stating a boundary he had made long ago. "I told her that Arya is my daughter in every way that matters," he continued. "And if she couldn't treat her like family, then she wasn't welcome in ours." I didn't realize I was crying until Arya reached over and touched my cheek. "Mommy?" she said softly. "Why are you sad?" I wiped my face quickly and smiled. "I'm not sad. I'm just really, really proud of you." Caleb came home an hour later. The second he walked in, Arya ran to him. He dropped to his knees and wrapped her in a hug so tight she squealed. "You were amazing," he told her. "You were braver than most grown-ups." She looked at him with wide eyes. "Was Grandma mad?" He looked her in the eye and said, "Maybe. But I'm not worried about Grandma. I'm proud of you, and I love you." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and skipped off to her room. When he stood up, I walked into his arms and held him for a long time. "I should have done something sooner," I whispered. "No," he said. "You've been protecting her in 1,000 quiet ways. Today, she protected herself. That means we did something right." That night, after we put Arya to bed, we sat on the couch and talked about what came next. We both knew Sylvia would try to explain it away. She might say it was a joke or blame the wine. But it didn't matter anymore. The line had been drawn, and this time it wasn't going to be erased. The decision had already been made, not just by Caleb and me, by Arya too. She knew who she was, and she knew who stood with her. The next morning, I got a text from Caleb's sister. It just said, "What did the note say?" I didn't answer right away. I sat with it. I read it a few times. I stared at those 6 words and felt a rush of anger, sadness, and exhaustion all at once. Because she had been there. She had heard what Sylvia said. She had watched Arya stand up and speak, and still, she hadn't stood up for her. None of them had. And now they were curious about the note, like it was gossip, like it was entertainment. Later that day, I found the note on the counter. Caleb had taken it back from Sylvia before we left. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket like it was something precious. When I opened it, I read it again, slowly this time. Every word mattered. "Mom, if you are reading this, it means you've said something cruel out loud that you should have kept to yourself. So let me make something clear. Arya is my daughter, not my stepdaughter, not someone I'm helping to raise. She is my child. I chose her. She chose me. If you can't treat her like family, then you are not part of ours. If you cannot see her as worthy of love, respect, and your full-hearted acceptance, then you will not see us anymore. You don't get to insult my child and still expect me to smile at your table. Caleb." It was short, direct, and firm. No emotion wasted. No apology offered. Later that afternoon, Sylvia showed up at our door without warning. She stood on the porch with a small paper bag in one hand. Her lipstick was perfectly done, but her eyes were tired. I opened the door and stepped outside, not letting her in. "I just came to drop this off," she said, holding out the bag. "It's something I meant to give Arya before the party." I took the bag, but didn't move aside. "She's inside," I said, "but she doesn't want to see you right now." Sylvia's mouth twitched, like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. She looked past me into the hallway, then back at me. "She's a smart girl," she said. "Very poised." "She gets that from her dad," I said plainly. Sylvia flinched. She wasn't used to being shut out. "I suppose I deserved that," she muttered. I didn't answer. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded envelope, and held it out. "For Caleb," she said. "I don't expect him to call." I took it and nodded. She stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked away without saying goodbye. I closed the door and went to find Arya. She was in her room, coloring. I sat beside her on the floor. "Grandma came by," I said. "She left something for you." Arya looked up and took the paper bag carefully. She opened it and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver locket, simple, plain, probably from that same jewelry box Sylvia had shown off the day before. Arya turned it over in her hand and said, "Can I give it to Lily?" Lily was her best friend from school. "You can do whatever you want with it," I said. "It's yours now." She smiled and set it aside. That night, Caleb read the letter from his mother silently. When he finished, he handed it to me. It was a single page, full of backhanded apologies, phrases like, "I didn't mean to cause a scene," and "family dynamics are complicated." She never actually said she was sorry, not to Arya, not for what she said. Caleb folded it in half and dropped it into the trash. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved. "We're not going back," he said. I nodded. "I know." In the days that followed, something shifted. Caleb stopped answering group texts. We stopped being invited to family dinners. The silence was loud at first, but then it turned peaceful. For the first time, we weren't carrying the weight of being tolerated. We were living as a family that didn't have to fight for our place at someone else's table. Arya never asked about Sylvia again. She never cried. She never brought up the party. But one night, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked at me and asked, "Do I belong to us?" I kissed her forehead and said, "You're the heart of us." She smiled and rolled over, pulling her blanket up to her chin. And just like that, I knew we had everything we needed. 2 weeks after the party, we got a wedding invitation from one of Caleb's cousins. It came in the mail, addressed to Caleb and family. No mention of me, no mention of Arya. A subtle message wrapped in cardstock and cursive font. Caleb threw it away without reading it. There wasn't a fight. No confrontation, no final scene where everything is yelled out across a dinner table. The door simply closed, and we chose not to open it again. At first, the quiet felt strange. Our weekends used to revolve around birthday parties, baby showers, group texts, asking who was bringing what. Now the calendar stayed empty. The phone didn't buzz as often. But what replaced the noise was something stronger. Peace, clarity, a home where none of us had to shrink. Aria was lighter, not just happier, she had always been good at finding joy, but freer. She didn't ask why we hadn't gone back. She didn't beg to visit or wonder what Sylvia might do next. She accepted the silence as a gift, even if she didn't know to call it that. One evening, she sat next to Caleb on the couch, watching an old movie. Her head rested on his shoulder. She reached up, took his hand, and said, "I'm glad you're my dad." No ceremony, no drama, just truth. He squeezed her hand and replied, "Me too." That moment stayed with me, because it reminded me that while families can break your heart, they can also put it back together if you build them with intention. Before Caleb, I thought acceptance meant learning how to take up less space. I thought love came with conditions. I didn't grow up in a house where people apologized. I didn't know that boundaries could be an act of love. But watching him love Aria without hesitation taught me that there is nothing weak about drawing a line. There is nothing selfish about protecting your peace. Sylvia's absence did not leave a hole. It left room for better conversations, room for birthday parties where no one had to prove they belonged, room for Aria to grow up without having to translate cruelty as tradition. I don't hate Sylvia. I used to spend a lot of energy trying to understand her, to soften her sharpness, to earn something that was never going to be freely given. But I no longer need her approval, and more importantly, Aria never did, because she had Caleb, and she had me, and she had herself. I think about that day often, the moment she stood up, the way her voice didn't shake, the way she held out that note without blinking. It changed everything, not just the room, not just our relationship with Sylvia, but something inside me. For years, I thought my job was to keep the peace, that protecting Aria meant keeping things quiet. But real peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from truth. That little girl in her sunflower dress reminded me of that. And that's what I carry with me now. When people ask why we don't go to Caleb's family events anymore, I don't offer long explanations. I say we're doing what's best for our daughter. Some people understand, some people don't. But the truth is, I don't owe anyone a defense for choosing love over legacy. What I owe is to Aria and to Caleb and to myself to keep building a family where no one has to earn their place, where love isn't conditional, where children are never treated like they are on trial. And if that means fewer invitations and quieter holidays, then so be it, because we're not missing anything. We're finally home. Thank you for listening to my story. I didn't share it to get sympathy or start a family feud. I shared it because maybe someone out there needs to hear that it's okay to walk away from people who can't love your child the way they deserve to be loved. It's okay to say, enough, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've lived through, I hope you'll take a second to let me know in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you found value in this video, please like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're building a space here where stories matter and voices are heard, yours included. Until next time, take care of yourself, and take care of each other.